I can't explain to you my relief that you've actually turned up, so thank you very much. I had this image of all the hard work that people have done voting, and there was just going to be me and my imaginary friends again. So thank you very much, and I would vote for that guy because he's a very good-looking lad. I just thought I'd add that. Okay, so thanks to the University of Sheffield's Student Union for the opportunity to give this talk, and to all those involved with Inspiration & Co. I also want to say a big cheers to colleagues I can see here and students who voted for me, especially those students on the BA Education, Culture and Childhood. Woo! Woo! And rubbish that was. And our MA courses in Education and PhD research students. Thank you very much. And as you will all know, when we learn together, I do have a tendency to go off on tangents and use inappropriate language. But because this is being filmed, I'm going to try and not do that. I'm actually going to try and be involved in something that my mother can see and not go, oh, why do you do that? You do spoil yourself. So unusually for me, I'm going to be reading from a script. I'm going to talk for only 25 minutes, you'll be pleased to know. And then I want to hear from you. I want to hear your views on some of the ideas that I'm going to throw at you today. I hope that's okay. Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you. Right, okay. So my question is a pretty simple one, not. In this talk, I want to think about what it means to be human in the year 2014. Now, this is a big question. It's one that colleagues and I and many others are trying to answer through a number of research projects and collaborative ventures. And what I'm going to do today is to introduce you to 3 projects, each of which approach the question of the human in different ways. Now, before doing that, let me just say that this is not my talk, nor are these ideas of one person. The ideas I will share with you this lunchtime are the result of collaborations and conversations with many, many others, often involving wine. And if we know one thing, we know this, that learning and discovery are always collective endeavours. So I feel very pleased to be one name, but I'm going to be sharing with you the ideas of lots of names, really. And in particular, I'd like to thank Rebecca Lawtham, Catherine Ruswick-Cole, David Hyatt, Liz Wood, Tom Billington, Rod McAlco, and Tanya Tishkowski for our chatting, writing, working, and drinking together. Okay, so the first project I want to talk to you about is something called disability studies. Now, disability studies at the University of Sheffield is a collection of researchers, academics, students, activists who are seeking to understand the meaning of disability. And this includes colleagues from very diverse disciplines, many perhaps that are represented here today, such as archaeology, sociology, medicine, dentistry, education, social work, social policy, psychology, Chinese studies, English and history. And there are others. Over the last 18 months, we have been coming together to share our research ideas through a number of what we call interdisciplinary dialogues. Basically, we get together and we have, over a 2-hour period, 4 of us speaking, and we are asked to speak to one another using non-jargon language about what we are doing in our disciplines and what this is getting us to learn about disability. Now, through this work, we are reminded that disabled people have been historically judged as not quite human, inhuman, non-human, akin to animals, at one with the earth, in touch with the angels, out on a limb, rarely seen as human beings. And in this sense, then, disability evokes an otherness to humanity. And even today in our contemporary capitalist society, disabled people risk being cast as societal outsiders, always less than human. So, for example, In this current research project, which includes disabled people's organisations and Manchester Metropolitan University, as well as ourselves, we are exploring the ways in which disabled people with intellectual disabilities, that's a term that used to have the horrendous title mental retardation, by the way, are coping with cuts to benefits, reductions in welfare services, and a time of austerity. In short, this project is trying to find out the lives of disabled people faced with the monstrosity known as the coalition government. This has led us to ask a number of other questions. How are people with learning disabilities faring in current society at a time of austerity, welfare cuts, and big society? Are disabled people with learning disabilities part of our wider society? And if you like, in short, are they then considered to be human? And our sense and our fear is that because of cuts, because of austerity, and disabled people are being pushed to the margins of humanity in this country. We are finding that economic troubles spell disaster for some disabled people. The bedroom tax, I don't know if you've heard of this, but the bedroom tax of the current British government, which insists that those living in social housing must have a direct correlation of residence to their number of bedrooms, even if, by the way, they use one of those bedrooms for their carers, has pushed disabled people and their families out of cherished homes and far away from their communities and services. Communities, too, are, at times it would seem, unwelcoming, as evidenced by an increase in hate crime against disabled people over the last few years. We always see this. Whenever there is an economic downturn, we see a rise in hate crime being reported. This is just reported, by the way, against disabled people. It would appear then that disabled people might struggle to find a place at the table of valued human life when faced with such hostilities. You see, non-disabled culture patrols its borders with vigilance and care, only letting people in deemed fit enough, those considered to be adequately or normatively human. And meanwhile, many disabled people continue to be excluded from everyday life. They are rendered inhuman. Disabled people, the Canadian social theorist Tanya Tuskowski argues, too often find themselves on the edge of all that counts as human, on the ordinary borders of life, including work, leisure, and love. Consequently, since the 1960s, disabled people with learning disabilities have fought for their human rights, for recognition, to be treated like other, well, human beings. And their choice of political slogan, "We are people first." Is this not a slogan that demands to be recognized as human? Why so? Because, suffice to say, disability troubles what we normally or normatively understand as human. The human is troubled by disability. Yet, while we can find clear evidence that disabled people risk being erased by dominant culture, you're not a human being, there is also counter-evidence to suggest that disability is massively desired by our society. Indeed, disability is everywhere. More than that, disability is growing. For example, the stickiness of disability labels applied to children across the globe has grown exponentially over the last 10 years. For example, last year's publication of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, fascinating reading, make sure you read it just before you go to sleep at night, by the American Psychiatric Association, heralds a smorgasbord of new labels. And an article in last year's Guardian by Doward provides an accessible overview of debates raging around the relative merits of this rewritten diagnostic manual. So, here are some of the new diagnoses that Doward, I think, beautifully summarizes. First, disruptive mood deregulation disorder. I insist you use this with your partners and loved ones, as I put down in argument. There's no need for your DMMD, baby. Or is that DM squared D? That's up to you, in it. For those diagnosed with abnormally severe and frequent temper tantrums, or the manager of Newcastle United Football Club. Secondly, binge eating disorder, for those who eat to excess 12 times in 3 months. Maybe 3 days, I'd go with that one, but 3 months? That sounds like a regular 3 months to me. Thirdly, hoarding disorder. My better half has this, defined as, quote, persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions regardless of actual value. One of the things that her mother says to her when she says, why have you not divorced that Goodley yet? And finally, oppositional defiance disorder, one of my favourites, described by one critic as a condition afflicting children who say no to their parents more than a certain number of times. Might we conclude then that we are dividing up sections of the human population in an ever more obsessed focus on labelling the peccadilloes of human diversity? One wonders if in 20 years we might all have a label. And I would suggest, I'm going to propose today, we will all have a label. If you don't have a label, you're not with it. We will not be down with the kids if you do not have a label in 20 years. And if this is the case, would we still refer to ourselves as human beings? Okay, so the second project I want to talk about circles the question of the human in a different way. And it circles the question of the human through reference to ableism. Colleagues across the universities of Sheffield, York and Leeds are working together as part of a new collaboration, what we're calling the White Rose Studies of Ableism. Now, if disablism refers to the exclusion of people with sensory, physical or cognitive impairments from everyday life, then ableism refers to a set of values and social practices that maintain and uphold those ideals associated with being autonomous, responsible, able-bodied and minded, economically productive, ready to spend, psychologically and physically perfect, still able to spend, independent and never in need of the help of others unless we choose to pay for it. These human types are most valued in our society because they fit ableist ideals. The sad truth, however, is that many of us feel lacking when we face these ideals. Who doesn't, for example, in this room, have a bad hair day? All of us, I would suggest, apart from David Beckham. But other than David Beckham, we all find ourselves lacking in the realm of the able. And this does not end with concerns about hair and appearance. And this is where even Beckham, fails to match up to ableist ideals. Because these ideals evoke what the philosopher Alain de Botton termed status anxiety. Are we earning enough? Are our holidays exotic enough? How sexy are our Facebook updates? Are our selfies pretty enough? In our ableist society, we endlessly feel the pull for improvements and the draw of human enhancement. More and more people use Botox, fillers, correct selfie camera angles, more severe forms of plastic surgery, and tragically, ever more severe selfie camera angles. So my current one with my eldest is something like that, with strange kind of, and enough of it. And my younger daughter is more kind of has a side angle, which is, so I'll apologise to them later. Now, intriguingly, we have globally a growing transhumanist movement. I don't know if you've heard of this, but this is a real political, cultural movement galvanized around the idea that the present human condition just ain't good enough. And this transhumanist movement seeks to blend human and machine, wetware and hardware, in the pursuance of perfection. So this is an organization called Humanity Plus. They're represented on this slide here, and they state that they bring together activists, researchers, funders, designers, technologists together to reboot humanity. That's what they say. They want to reboot humanity. And for that alone, they should be punched. And on a more mundane level, not thinking about this kind of wider context of transhumanism, let us think about energy drinks, legal highs, and the use of prescription uppers, including Ritalin, that are flooding the youth and student marketplace. Now, I can see the justification for taking what is effectively speed in a nightclub. But we are seeing here the use of uppers to enhance one's performance under exam conditions. How dull is youth? How dull. We used to take drugs to do for drugs, not very much enhancing your exam performance. And what this does, I think, is more a symptom of the many ways in which humanity feels that it's failing itself. And this is kind of ironic, because if we go back to the example of disability, with people with intellectual disabilities who want to be recognized as human beings, how ironic when those very human beings, it seems, are discontent with being normal and with being human. Why would one want to be part of this group who clearly are not happy with the way they are? So here we have the case of technologies, robotics, Google's knowledge of everything we post online, and virtual environments that will only ever increase in terms of their sophistication. And as they merge with the biological, the so-called natural makeup of what we used to call humanity, and they both have these, scare quotes around them, one is left asking, are we human anymore? When we plug our bodies into technology, or plug technology into our bodies, what have we done to this quaint notion of the human being? And I would go along with that the notion of the human being is actually quite a quaint idea now. And heartbreakingly, how ironic that we deny some people, such as disabled people, access to these human heartlands when at the same time there's so much work going on attempting to radically overhaul the natural terrain of the human. So in one sense, people are being denied access to this. At the same time, this thing is being, this terrain of the human is being massively shifted and changed. And this leads us to the third project, the final project, what I might call the stuff in the middle, or maybe the stuff in the future. And this relates to everyday changes to humanity, the common humanity of 2014. So recently, a number of colleagues, I can spot one, have been getting together to work upon the biohybrid human network. And this is the result of winning the Futures 2022 interdisciplinary research collaboration funded by the University of Sheffield and led by Professor Richard Jones. So effectively, we were given the opportunity to meet together in a Sheffield hotel for a day and a half, and a number of us got together. Again, wine was included within this. And here are some of the members that managed to get together to form what we call the biohybrid human network. So as you can see, we have Jags from chemical and biological engineering through to Rennie from music, Stuart psychology. It's quite funny, within the meeting you'd refer to people as the heart bloke. Or the rat boy, just because we didn't really going to get each other's disciplinary titles, but we did it in a loving way. And what was very interesting about this is that we found it very, very difficult to talk to one another, because we come from disciplines with very, very different vocabularies. And so what we had to do to try to work together was to try and work in collaborative ways. And we think we got there to find shared points of collaboration. So the network has now appointed 3 PhD students who will start their research in October this year. And that research will be around 3 distinct areas. The first will be biohybrid systems. The second is biohybrid individuals. And the third is biohybrid societies. And hopefully you can see there's different layers that we're interested in of the way in which the human is being made in the social. So these 3 themes emphasize the extended character of the human. across biology, culture, society, technology. And through this network, I've had the privilege to listen to people whose ideas are quite honestly alien. They push me out of my own comfort zone, but always excite me around new thoughts. And I think collectively, colleagues of the network are addressing a very simple but also important point. What we used to know as human and the human world have fundamentally morphed, shifted and blurred in ways that universities and academics are still playing catch up to understand. The world is moving so quickly, and the university is in danger of actually not keeping up with this. Let me give you a kind of an everyday example of this. Remember the last time you waited at a platform for a train and looked around to see what your fellow commuters were doing? Now, if you were me on Saturday, that would have been, I'd looked around and it was also a group of equally pissed off Nottingham Forest fans at Nottingham train station. But I'm thinking more on a kind of everyday, mundane level, not something as exciting as that, which I'm sure you would all have wished to have experienced yourself, as I did not. So let's just think, what do you think the commuters were doing? And I bet my mortgage that they were all on their phones. Yeah, a very common everyday occurrence. Now, some decry our lost days when we used to talk to one another, one body to another, one voice to an ear, a person to a person, real communication. But I'm not actually sure we ever did do that. I've never seen people doing it on the London Tube, for example. They just ignore you. They do in Sheffield because, of course, we're northern and friendly and slightly confused. But now, today, also, we are, so it would seem, individualized entities plugged into our little mobile worlds. As one cultural commentator put it, like a form of collectivized autism. And notice there again how disability always indicates something bad and wrong. But are we becoming more and more individualized? Is that all we have to say about humanity now? That we've become less civilized, less community-oriented, less interested in other people? And as we plug out in our kids earlier and earlier in their lives, will this isolate them from the outset? What are we doing here? Here's a picture of a baby with an iPad. And so some people, this is very scary. I mean, for me, it's scary because I'd just be worried about the iPad, obviously. And obviously the child. Now, my two daughters are, it would be fair to say, in a really objective way, slaves to their smartphones. And they have to, you can blame their dad. He paid for their phone contracts. They're on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat. And yesterday I learnt of 2 new programs, apps that I don't know what's happening. They could be, I don't know, hacking into the American government websites for all I know, but they were on it for hours, endlessly. Now the question is, where are my girls' subjective worlds now? If I were to ask them to point to their personality, their selfhood, their personhood, themselves, what would they do? Would they point to their heads, their chests, or their smartphones? What we traditionally understood as private spoken conversations are now being played out in private, but also very public arenas of social media. And my friendship group before the internet in my 20s might have gone into double figures. I'm obviously lying now just to make myself sound popular then. Now my daughters, 13 and 11 years old, have friendship groups on Facebook that are in triple figures. But are these real friends? Should we put scare quotes around the word friend on Facebook? Should we contest my daughter's ways of relating? Or is my desire to contest their friendships to dismiss them because of their virtual location? And is this a desire of mine located in the past? In short, an old-fashioned modernist sense of the human? And I suspect so. Indeed, the feminist philosopher Rosie Braidotti laughs off old-fashioned, well-worn, technologically free, purist versions of the human. Get with the kids, she says. As humans and as humanity, we have moved on. The complex merging of ideas, opinions, beliefs, images, cultures, practices, through the global exchange of money and information, have led us to a new kind of human place. We are, she says, posthuman. And the posthuman condition for Braidotti suggests, quote, urges us to think critically and creatively about who and what we are actually in the process of becoming. Now this sounds like more exciting and less sneery around my daughters than their use of smartphones. One recurring consideration, indeed, is the idea that human beings have always been hybridized. They've always been interlinked. They've always been just more than one body. In short, human beings are and always were what they are and were through their relationships with other humans and their connections with the earth, animals, spirituality, the capitalist marketplace, the internet, global interpenetrations, culture, discourse, sound and image, the stuff we can touch and the stuff we can only imagine. And in the post-human condition, we are always extended and interconnected, plugged into a host of human and non-human relationships. Perhaps this was ever thus. But one time, many years ago, we became fixated on the isolated human being and ignored our extensions. And we might call that time the Enlightenment. We might call that the rise of industrial capitalism. We might also call that around the time when modern-day science was born. So I want to conclude. And I want to conclude by going back to where we started, disability. Which I, of course, I would say is, which I like to think of as the quintessential post-human condition. People with physical, sensory, or cognitive impairments are, by the very definition of these labels, already plugged into a myriad of cultural, professional, disciplinary, and political networks that shape their bodies and minds. Disability demands, as a necessity, and desires, in order to live, interdependent connections with others, and these are other humans, with technologies, non-human entities, communication streams, peopled and non-peopled networks. So rather than thinking of disability in terms of deficit, lack, incompleteness, or inhuman, I think we should flip our thinking. Disability is a post-human condition that makes us think again about how we might extend ourselves, perhaps become dishuman together. So let me finish by thinking about how disability expands the human to connect with other humans and other things. This is actually a contemporary wheelchair, or it's a cyborg when you sit in it. The employer of personal assistants, somebody that might be defined as having profound intellectual disabilities, is actually what might be called an assemblage of humanity. They might be on there, and without them, by the way, all those other people won't have jobs. Yeah, so disability again extends this notion of the human away from just a sole person to that of a collective. A blind woman walking down the street with the support of a guide dog is a complex hybrid of human-animal. This is why people get so entranced, particularly by guide dogs. They think there's something particularly intriguing about them. We might think again of this as an example of a complex human-animal hybrid. Long before iPads were around, users of augmentative and alternative communication technologies have always been complexly blended with their technologies. These are not people lacking the ability to speak. These are complex users of technology or complex blending of wetware and hardware. The child labelled with special educational needs, who has the regular input of the classroom assistant. These are not deficient, lacking students. Instead, they are the origin of extending educational experiences for all students. We know this from research. When you talk about teaching assistants, many kids in the classroom benefit from their presence there. yeah? Not just the disabled student that they're learning. They extend the educational experience. The tube-fed baby reminds us that technology gives life and the baby gives life to technology. Here again, we're looking at very complex notions of life and how that is bound together, and disability is one way in which this is demonstrated. Why do we always obsess about independence? Disability reminds us that we are interdependent, that we're always connected to one another, that we need one another in order to live. And actually, it's pretty dull when you're on your own, often. Parents with intellectual disabilities demand us to think, for example, about parenting competence, not as something within a person, but within a community. We know that parents with intellectual disabilities, when they're able to keep hold of their children away from social work, it's because their support around them is in place. Now, my sense then is that all of these posthuman configurations of bio, techno, social, human, animal, and community remind us of disability's posthuman potential. Disability demands us to think again about the human, and disability moves us towards more enhanced versions of the human. Perhaps returning to the title of the talk, we might want to rephrase the question. What does it mean to be posthuman in the year 2014? And my response to that question will be, disability might have some of the answers. Thank you very much.